our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that.
My goal in this deposition was to be truthful, but not particularly helpful.
Welcome to Unspun, the podcast that makes you better at finding the truth. The way people get news is changing. It used to be that there were many reporters who would research stories and write articles, but now politicians and famous people share information directly with you on social media and the internet. That means you find out things fast, but it's up to you to make sure the information's actually accurate. And newsmakers don't always do their part. The temptation to manipulate information is strong. They bend the truth to deceive so that they can avoid accountability, so that they can advance their agendas. When you recognize these agendas, you can sometimes find out what's real. And we're at a crossroads where anyone can share anything online, so it's important to sharpen your critical thinking skills. Finding that deception before it goes viral is pretty much a survival skill now, and we're going to do it together. Let's get unspun. Hello, truth seekers, and welcome to this week's episode of Unspun. In today's episode, I want to talk about what happened with that group chat on Signal, and in particular, the journalist's role in it. But our main topic is going to be journalism and AI. We'll talk about how AI is already being used in the news that you see, some of the benefits and risks of using AI, and maybe what you as a news consumer can expect. Sound good? Let's get unspun. So first with the Signal chat. In case you're not completely up on the news, there was a big story a little while back about high-ranking officials in the U.S. government using a group chat on a communication service called Signal to plan an attack on the Houthis in Yemen. Most of the reaction to that has been to consider how Signal is not an approved method for important government communication. But what I think was very interesting is the way that we, the public, knew about it. We found out about it because the creator of the group chat, the United States' National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, apparently accidentally added a journalist. That journalist was Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic, which is a news magazine in the U.S. When Goldberg published his article saying he was added to this group chat, one of the first responses from the government was to try to discredit Goldberg. For example, President Trump seemed not to be aware of the story, but said he thought The Atlantic was a magazine that would soon be going out of business. After he learned more, he called Goldberg a sleazebag. The White House press secretary said Goldberg was a, quote, anti-Trump sensationalist reporter, and eventually Mike Waltz said he had never met, didn't know, and had never communicated with Goldberg, calling him, quote, the bottom scum of journalists. So, truth seekers, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that this is an example of a personal attack. So a personal attack is when a communicator doesn't attack what someone says, but they attack the credibility of the source. Logically, it's not very logical because even people who lie all the time might not be lying this time. And even people with bad motives can sometimes be right. I am not at all saying that Jeffrey Goldberg was a liar or had bad motives, but that was the implication from what some of the newsmakers said. I did think, though, that it would be interesting to talk a little bit about what someone like Jeffrey Goldberg will go through when they get this kind of information. He said in the article that they ran that at first he thought it must be some kind of spoof or something meant to fool him. And I think that's probably reasonable because you wouldn't expect the government to be using that channel at all. But when specific information from the thread he was in started not matching, specific information in real life, he had a decision to make, which was whether he should try to publish the information or not. The thing that you're weighing at this time is public interest, right? In your head as a journalist, you're thinking the information in the thread is obviously sensitive, and if people knew that information, they could, for example, attack U.S. service members. But the public also has an interest in knowing if their national security officials are not following their own procedures in a way that could be dangerous. Now, a big publication like The Atlantic will have access to lawyers, and I'm pretty confident that the legal counsel for The Atlantic weighed in on this. Just what is the risk to the publication if they publish the information? And you'll notice that when Goldberg did publish, it was well after the event, and he did redact out certain pieces of specific information. This was a choice that he made in order to preserve some of the need for secrecy that would cause the government to have those opinions. But that would be a difficult decision for Goldberg, right? Because he has to decide if the risk to his publication and to himself is worth the public having that knowledge. And as I've said, Goldberg has faced some pretty defamatory attacks after that. Also, he might feel like he's at personal risk if he shares information the public's not supposed to know. So this is why you definitely go to the lawyer. What happened after was also quite interesting. Goldberg heard many of the people on or related to the call testifying in front of Congress that the information on the thread was not classified. And there's an interesting legal thing that goes on there, because testimony given in front of Congress is usually what we would call privileged information. So that means that if a journalist publishes it and the information turns out to be wrong, the journalist is not liable for the accuracy of that information. So it protects you in things like if someone gets up in court and lies on the stand, a journalist can report what they said without necessarily being accountable for spreading those lies. So, once those people testified in Congress that the information was not classified, Goldberg did publish some of the stuff that he had chosen to redact. And again, I think this was probably a calculated decision that was made with the attorneys at The Atlantic. And I think it was made in relation to the public interest. It's useful for people in the public to know if their government officials are not being accurate, particularly in important settings like Congress. Anyway, it does happen from time to time that journalists will get information accidentally, and they do have to make decisions about what to do with that information. And public interest is a big factor in that. Okay, let's talk about AI. When we talk about artificial intelligence or AI in journalism, what we really mean is using computers to handle tasks usually done by people. These are tasks like writing stories, analyzing data, even creating images. It's important, though, to not think of AI as having thoughts or feelings. It's not a journalist itself, right? It just follows instructions and learns patterns from the data it's trained on. One kind of AI that's becoming common in newsrooms is called generative AI. Generative AI can create completely new content, words, pictures, even videos, based on prompts that humans make. And you've probably heard about tools like ChatGPT for writing or DALL-E or Midjourney for images. So, for example, a news outlet could use ChatGPT to quickly and automatically write up a short sports recap, and DALL-E could help create illustrations if a newsroom doesn't have a graphic designer available. And AI is already helping journalists every day in kind of three main ways: gathering news, producing content, and delivering it to audiences. So let's talk about news gathering first. Journalists can use AI tools like Otter AI or Amazon Transcribe to automatically turn their recorded interviews or press conferences into text. Now, I can tell you, as a reporter, I used to spend a lot of time just typing up notes, and this would have let me focus on writing better stories. Maybe. I can say I also found that typing up notes was a good way to get the facts into my head so that I could organize them. Another example is keyword monitoring tools such as Samdesk or NewsWhip. And so these scan online to find what we call trending topics. This can be used to alert editors to things that are going on. In the old days, we used to listen to the police scanner for this kind of thing related to crime, and these kind of services will let editors monitor a bigger range of topics that people are talking about. AI can also help with stories that are based on data, because some AI tools make that analysis a whole lot easier. Now, I talked a few episodes ago when I talked about investigative journalism about the Panama Papers, and these involved thousands of documents. So journalists use AI to help sort through it, spotting important dates and names and connections between them. And similarly, the Washington Post has an AI tool called Lead Locator that studies voter turnout data and flags patterns or surprises that could turn into important stories. So that's the first. Second, AI can literally create the news itself. Now, when I was in college, one summer I was able to work on the business desk of the New York Times as like a news assistant. This is quite a while ago, about 1989. And at that time, AI was really just something you'd hear in a fantasy novel. But I remember having a conversation with Bob Hurtado, who was the regular columnist covering the bonds market. And he would write a story every day about the bond market. And I remember talking to him one day about how he thought someday his job was going to be taken over by a computer. And he showed me that basically when you have a story about a financial market, your story is either going to be the market went up, the market went down, or the market stayed the same. And then the bottom half of the story explains what happened, which funds changed over the course of the day that explain the difference. He said it wouldn't be good every day because sometimes unusual things do happen, but a lot of these financial stories were highly predictable. And so he told me someday you're not going to need me because the computer will be able to do all of this. And if you fast forward to today, he was kind of right. There's many different kinds of content that are now being created by AI. AI is already writing and publishing stories that follow clear patterns or use structured information. So there's corporate earning reports, like he was talking about. The AP uses AI software to turn financial data into short news updates, and it lets human journalists spend their time doing kind of the deeper analysis. In sports, AI can instantly create recaps after games. It can kind of highlight key plays and final scores, and that means that readers can get fast updates without reporters needing to write these really basic stories. And AI helps smaller communities access local news in some cases. So, for example, in the UK, the Press Association uses a system called Radar, which automatically generates local news stories from public data like crime statistics or health reports. And in places where you have these news deserts where you don't have news available, this can help newsrooms reach communities they might otherwise miss. When an earthquake hits in Southern California, the LA Times uses an AI program called QuakeBot, and it immediately posts details about the quake, where it is, how strong it was, often within seconds. And AI can also make weather reporting more interesting. So, National World, another media group in the UK, recently launched an AI generated weather presenter that delivers daily forecasts automatically, and it actually blends information and visuals. And then, still in the UK, there's a tool called Juice at the BBC that automatically translates news into different languages and summarizes longer stories, which maybe makes news more accessible. AI even helps create graphics tailored for social media, and so that can make stories visually engaging for younger audiences, maybe on Instagram or TikTok. And finally, AI has a role in sharing the news and getting audiences to engage in it. AI personalizes the information that you see. Just like social media platforms have algorithms to determine content, news apps do too. And so AI apps can track what you click on and how long you read and recommend similar content. It's used by journalists too. There is an AI tool called Chartbeat that analyzes how readers interact with stories overall. And reports from tools like this help newsrooms allocate people. Additionally, AI can automatically turn written stories into audio using text to speech. And so this can help people listen to the news instead of reading it. So these are just some of the ways that AI is already shaping how journalists find stories, create content, and share news with audiences like you. But you should know that using AI to write and produce news does carry some pretty substantial risks. If newsrooms trust AI systems too much, it can mean mistakes that can undermine trust, it can confuse audiences, and even spread misinformation. Really, I think the biggest concern about AI in journalism is accuracy. So generative AI systems like ChatGPT or other kind of similar tools, they sometimes create completely believable information that just doesn't have the facts to back it up. And these errors are known in the industry as hallucinations. So here's a real world example. CNET is a popular technology news website, and they decided to experiment with publishing stories entirely written by AI. And just as an aside, getting to that level where AI is actually creating all of the content is really interesting to people who own news outlets. Because if they remove people that they have to pay from the system, they make more money. Anyway, after the stories were published, readers and journalists quickly began noticing that something wasn't right, and they reviewed it, and CNET discovered that more than half of the AI generated articles had factual errors. Some were little mistakes, like they got the date wrong or something like that, but others were more serious, like just publishing bad financial advice. And CNET had to go back and correct or even retract a whole bunch of the stories. And you can imagine a similar situation in breaking news. So, for example, it's pretty routine to write up a crisis story about like upcoming weather if you repurpose an existing forecast. But if you leave that up to AI and it hallucinates the evacuation routes or what areas are affected, that could have really terrible consequences. People might panic, they might make dangerous decisions based on false information. A second major worry is about complexity and depth. Journalism isn't always just stringing together simple facts. It can be about helping readers understand complicated situations. So when you've got stories about politics, about healthcare, about global conflicts, those stories often require really deep human analysis. And the experienced reporters that you get at news outlets have invested years learning how to carefully unpack this kind of complicated information and how to communicate it clearly to the readers. But AI will struggle with these nuances. It tends to oversimplify complex issues, and often it leaves out important context that a human journalist would know is needed. So, for example, if an AI were to report on a political conflict overseas, it might just summarize basic events, right? So it might just say there was a battle and this many people were killed or something like that, but it might not understand the underlying history or motivations. But real human journalists are trained to consider this broader context, which can include things like effect on other places. So if you had a story that said there was bad weather in Mexico and it was freezing, an AI might report on that and say it was cold and here was the temperature. But it might not know to see if it would affect produce prices in other countries that import Mexican fruits and vegetables. Journalists know when to ask more questions or to dig deeper, but AI kind of doesn't have that human judgment yet. And this brings us to another critical difference between humans and AI, which is empathy. Good news work isn't just facts, it also helps readers understand why a story matters. So if I have a story about families affected by a hurricane, a human reporter would know that they should interview people and share their emotions and experiences to help their readers feel connected to the situation. An AI system, on the other hand, it doesn't value feelings or personal experiences necessarily. And, they could hallucinate an impact story, but what good would that be? Why would anybody want that? AI can't really empathize, it can't build real connections, so stories that it writes often feel less authentic. And it makes it more hard for readers to emotionally engage with that content. Now, ethical issues are another big challenge. And I think it's fair to say that when a news outlet publishes a story, readers should be able to trust that it's accurate. But AI introduces some really complex ethical questions, such as who's accountable for mistakes. So, if an AI generated story falsely accuses someone of, a crime or damages their reputation, who's responsible? Is it the news outlet? Is it the programmers? Is it the company behind the AI tool? And there's concerns about bias too. AI systems work from training data. So this is information that's already collected, right? Such as past news articles, social media, websites, those kind of things. And we know that ideas of who gets to participate in and be valued in society have changed over time. But if the training data is old, it comes from an earlier time, and it reflects biases that we don't really have anymore, it can still show up in the AI's writing. So if you've got historical data that has unfair stereotypes or incorrect assumptions about people, AI can perpetuate those biases in its reporting. So, for example, if an AI is summarizing crime data without context, it could just reinforce harmful stereotypes about particular communities. It's risky. And to deal with that risk, some major newsrooms enact policies about how and when to use AI. So, for example, the Associated Press requires that AI generated content always has to be carefully reviewed by editors before they publish it. And the New York Times has guidelines too. Their policy says that journalism published under the Times brand has to be written and reported and edited by human journalists. So you can use AI for small tasks like summarizing content or helping suggest headlines, but it always has to be supervised and checked by people before they publish it. So AI can help newsrooms in important ways, but relying too much on those tools without human oversight brings up risk for really serious errors. You can have ethical challenges, and you can just lose the trust of your readers. I need to take a quick break. When I come back, we'll talk about some of the more specific challenges. I'll be right back. Welcome back. So, accuracy and ethics are both open issues, but I think it's fair to say AI also offers opportunities. And one of the most important is personalization, the ability to deliver news that's carefully tailored for your reader. But what does that really mean, and is it always good? Personalization means giving readers news that's designed to match their interests, their needs, maybe even their moods. And AI makes this possible by closely paying attention to what someone reads, what they share, even how long they spend on a screen. And this already happens for you if you read news online. News apps and websites can track the topics you choose most often, whether that's politics or sports or technology, and then show you more of the same. And they can even offer it in your preferred format, creating a video or a podcast or a written summary. And as with any kind of algorithmic selection, there's kind of good and bad to that. If you get newsletters from a news outlet, it's happening there too. So, for example, if you mostly click on business articles in your daily newsletter, the AI will start sending you more business related stories. Eventually, it might offer specialized newsletters that focus specifically just on what you're interested in. It can also allow for modular journalism, meaning that content is broken down into smaller, sort of interchangeable building blocks that can make up stories. So you might have a story about the economy, for example, and it could be broken into several parts. So there could be background facts, there could be local impacts, there could be expert quotes, and AI can be used to assemble these pieces together differently for different readers. So one person might get a really detailed text version, another might get just a short slideshow summarizing the main points. And this could be good, right? It could make news more interesting. Another really promising feature is AI-powered translation and text-to-speech capabilities, which make news more accessible to non-native speakers, to people who can't read, to people who are visually impaired. So a news story in English can be instantly translated and it can be turned into audio. And that can be powerful because then that lets that information reach new communities. But I have to say, the personalization also has risks because AI tends to give people content that confirms what they already believe. And so that means that people might end up in filter bubbles and they don't know about other things. They're just kind of isolated from perspectives they don't already have. And news in a particular area can become less diverse overall. And then everybody's getting slightly different versions of the same stories and really has no idea what other people are thinking about. And then there's the kind of serendipity idea. So personalization might mean fewer opportunities to discover something surprising or find an important story you didn't expect to be reading today. Sometimes there's a story I wasn't looking for, but it helps me understand the world in a new way. And highly personalized news can accidentally just take that away from me. But most importantly, I think personalization can make spreading misinformation easier because AI powered systems can tailor false stories to what I already believe or what I fear. One of the biggest concerns about AI in journalism today is deepfakes and other super realistic manipulations. So, deepfakes are photos, videos, audio clips that look or sound completely real but are actually made by AI. And they have become really easy to produce. Generative AI tools, some of them are free, including really accessible platforms like Midjourney and DALL-E or Adobe's Firefly. They let people quickly make fake but convincing, images, videos, even if they don't have a lot of technical skill. So, for example, an AI generated image of a supposed explosion near the Pentagon briefly went viral on social media, and it led to confusion and it even caused a little drop in the stock market. But a big problem with it was that it fooled the news. The image was shared pretty widely, not just by random social media accounts, but also by news sources that failed in their verification. Because even experienced journalists can struggle to recognize deep fakes, because the methods that they might use to detect them, such as doing reverse image searches or examining closely, aren't going to work as the content gets better looking. In fact, even OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, at one point shut down its own AI detection tool because it was just not accurate. And newsrooms are really vulnerable to this. So imagine if an AI generated video emerged of a political candidate admitting that they committed a crime just days before an election. Even if that's quickly disproven, that fake can change the election results because there will be a lot of people who see the fake and fewer who see the fact check. So newsrooms now have a new layer of ethical responsibility because if they even inadvertently publish AI generated misinformation, who's accountable? If there's not clear guidelines and consistent standards, that accountability becomes murky. So, newsrooms are beginning to train their staff on how AI generated misinformation works and how it can be identified. So, organizations like Reuters and the BBC are dedicating some of their resources in helping journalists learn these new techniques for spotting fakes. But because the technology evolves so rapidly, you have to be constantly updating that training. There's also an ongoing effort from groups like the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, which tries to embed verifiable information right into the files, so kind of giving a little watermark that shows who created or edited a piece of content. It's a neat idea. It's also complex and pretty expensive. And for smaller or local news organizations, there can be a gap, right? So it's another serious concern, a gap between large and small newsrooms. So well-funded kind of national level outlets have the staff and the training and the technology to fight that AI-driven misinformation more effectively. But smaller local newsrooms have a different story because they may not have enough staff to thoroughly vet the content. They're more likely to have to rely on third-party tools. So, if you're a small local paper and you're relying on an AI transcription service that's offered for free or no cost, if that company that offers that tool now decides to raise their prices significantly, the local newsroom may be out of luck, and that can really, disrupt their workflow. This has caused problems for publishers in smaller contexts too, like when Facebook dramatically changed its algorithm, and it caused traffic and ad revenue to fall off for some smaller outlets. A lot of the work making useful AI tools for journalism is focusing on those large-scale media operations, and from a business sense, that makes a lot of sense because they're the ones who have the money to pay for it. But, there's a tool that might be perfect for analyzing massive national level election data sets. It might not really work when you're looking at hyper-local stories. And so even when small outlets can use AI, it may not meet their particular needs. Still, some experts suggest that carefully adopted AI can help small newsrooms by saving time. Still, some experts suggest that carefully adopted AI can help smaller newsrooms by saving time. So, you might have a small local newsroom that's just got two reporters and one editor. And so AI tools could help the journalists analyze local public health data to find trends, or could automatically give a summary of what was passed at a city council meeting, which could give the reporters more time to do other investigations. But a bigger risk is that it could just replace them. So that kind of job displacement is a really acute risk, especially for smaller newsrooms. Because automating basic newsroom tasks will also make certain roles redundant, but small newsrooms with just a handful of reporters may find themselves just doing layoffs. And losing even one or two experienced journalists in a community newspaper can really affect their ability to cover local stories. So ultimately, AI adoption carries real risks for news. It can widen inequalities, it can weaken the editorial independence, it can reduce the quality of the journalism, and it can push people out of work. But if newsrooms approach AI thoughtfully, so if they balance innovation with thinking about those ethical concerns, you, truth seekers, the audience, could still benefit. And this delicate balance is probably going to determine whether AI is a threat or an opportunity for journalism. Have a great week and stay sharp out there. Thanks for getting Unspun with me this week. Unspun is a production of me, Amanda Sturgill, and is a proud member of the MSW Media family of podcasts. Send me your thoughts and ideas about trickery in the news on Gmail at theunspunpodcast@gmail.com. I even write back. And find this episode's show notes and more information at theunspunpodcast.substack.com. Want to learn more and get smarter? Check out my book, Detecting Deception: Tools to Fight Fake News, which is available on Amazon or your favorite online bookseller. And until next time, stay sharp, everyone.